And we're back. The music's over, Jonathan. You can stop dancing.
I love it every single time. I just want to keep jamming.
Just got to keep jamming out. How are you doing? You were gone last week. We did not have a show last week because Jonathan was out. And right before we were about to start the show, Jonathan's fill-in lost internet, so we had to cancel the show. Because no one wants to see me sit and ramble to myself for 30 minutes. So
it happens. I was out in the Las Vegas lands. Made a brief appearance at Black Hat. I hope everybody who's tuning in online and in the future watching this was able to attend our happy hour on Tuesday evening, and I hope it was a good one. I was not there, but I heard it was quite the turnout. For shame. It's okay. I'll skip the drinks. And then follow that with a little bit of B-Sides LV and DEF CON, which is my personal favorite. And then it's been a long week of recovery. Not sleeping much and a lot of walking, 25,000 steps a day. Had a pretty rough one this week. I'm still a little getting there, but made it out alive.
Recovering. So, you picked up a couple new souvenirs, I think, right?
Yeah, quite a few. Some of these little circuit board badges from DEF CON. This was the DEF CON Goon one, and lots of other toys. Right, friends made this really cool Tron ring.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it was nice. Definitely an art scene when it comes to nerdy stuff.
Yeah. I was not.
How are you doing?
What?
How are you
doing? Oh, how am I doing?
Missed you.
So I was like, where was I? I was here. What was I doing? I was doing normal stuff. I'm doing okay. Did not get to Black Hat or DEF CON, and thus also missed one of my favorite little events there, VetCon. Get together with all the old veterans in cybersecurity. Stayed here, got some good work done. Built up a back catalog of stories for us to talk about because we didn't have last week, and there was some interesting stuff that happened. Also, it's probably not going to show up because it's green. Actually, I bet you I can just go in here and turn off green screening real quick. See if it'll still work.
See, look at that. I bet our watchers didn't expect that to be fake. Whoa, is that a Nintendo Game Boy?
This is a Game Boy Advance SP built into a shell that is all metal. It's an all aluminum GBA SP. So
very pretty.
Very
nice.
Pretty, very cool. That was one of my recent little late night hobby builds.
That's your new shiny?
That's my new shiny. I've been playing a lot of Minish Cap, Legend of Zelda, good classics. But we have some really fun stories this week.
We have a lot. There's some crazy things going on in the world.
Yeah, we got some big ones. We got some small stuff that we just kind of want to mention as like sideshow kind of fun stuff. But I think the first one is really cool because it was actually timed for Black Hat and DEF CON.
But before, we must do our...
You're right. We must do... I actually had my mouse hovering over it for the entire time. We have to let you know that the views that we express... Oh, go ahead. You do it.
By the host and the live stream are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official opinions of Guy Point Security.
I'm sorry. I goofed you up. You could have beaten the timer there, but...
It's okay because we're about to talk about some crazy stuff and we have to get our disclaimer out.
Yeah. Some crazy stuff, but yeah, this one was actually timed for the time to be released with Black Hat and DEF CON. So there is a new USB Rubber Ducky, brand new version with some really cool new features. Actually, you were pretty pumped about some of that new stuff. So you want to take us off?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those listening in online and in the future, a USB Rubber Ducky is just a tiny little thumb drive looking device that essentially emulates a keyboard, and you can pre-program a number of keystrokes into it. So for instance, Windows, R, run, Internet Explorer, visit website, execute vulnerability, right? All automated in like this flow using something called a Ducky script. Well, the latest and greatest USB Rubber Ducky, which by the way, 10 years ago was when they first came out, and they were even featured in Mr. Robot. This new one is super cool. So the DuckyScript 3.0 language While, like I mentioned, the original model was very much sequential keystrokes that you pre-program. This supports stuff like functions, storing variables, and even logic flows. So stuff like if this, then that. And you can do like conditional testing on a Windows or Mac machine, for example. So now we can determine if, when we plug this in, if this is the appropriate victim, right? If this is the right computer to be doing this thing on. It's all in the hardware game, which I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, especially the the Rubber Ducky is not necessarily like like you said, it was featured in Mr. Robot, but it's not necessarily what I would consider to be or what I would typically think of as like probably someone who wants to actually penetrate a network or an environment in like real life is probably not carrying around just a Rubber Ducky, right? They're going to have their own toolkits and tool sets and stuff. Exactly. But it is a great kind of it's a great testing tool, and it's a great way to show and way to find out if things are vulnerable. And of course, an actual antagonistic actor could definitely be carrying one of these around and using it. But I think the introduction of the ability to contain logic and test for things actually does make it much more of a formidable kind of like off the shelf kind of threat, because now it's very much like, hey, you could carry one of these around and see a random computer sitting around and plug it in just to be like, hey, is this computer running XYZ, then execute these things. You need to have far less foreknowledge of what actually exists on that system now. You could use it much more as just kind of like a drop and go kind of thing. But it's also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm saying you're correct. It's one of many tools in the arsenal. But a quick, let me just stand over here and plug this into the thumb drive port and emulate a vendor specific keyboard, right? So even targeting stuff where we're disabling USB ports or locking hardware IDs to specific ones. Well, then if it's a Mac keyboard, then why not make it clone the Mac keyboard ID? And therefore, suddenly it seems like it's an allowed device, right? We only use XYZ brand here, and they're corporate issued. So boom, clone it. Definitely interesting.
It also has the ability now to generate pseudo random numbers and use those as delays between keystrokes to make it look more like a human activity. So trying to cover the tracks a little bit of it being utilized. So it's a very cool addition, and like we said, it was timed out for release with Black Hat and DEF CON for obvious reasons. All I can think about though is from my time that I used to go to all of the large conventions, as an actual representative of the company I was working for at the time. And all of the booths that are there with computers that are just sitting out as demo machines, like that could just, and they're running live software and they're connected to actual networks and stuff, like the rife opportunity at those conventions.
And it's interesting to name that all 500 units that were brought for sale were immediately sold out within the first day of 4 days of DEF CON. So gone. Like that's it.
I doubt even the first day needs to be calculated. Like you don't need to say the first day. It's probably the first couple hours.
Exactly.
Probably out.
So should we try an awkward segue?
Awkward segue. Go for it.
Yeah. So talking about ducks. Here's a floating duck for you. What about everybody's favorite archive, the RAR, right? We're not talking about zips. We're not talking about 7-zip or any other ones.
This is an almost painful segue. I'm being actively run over by this segue.
Well, why don't you kick this off? Since this was definitely an interesting new vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the stories from last week that we didn't get to cover, but CISA released a new warning about a couple new flaws that were being actively exploited in the wild, and particularly they highlighted this one for UnRAR, which is the common what's the right word here? Uncompressing tool for
like a archival and compression
archival
algorithm.
tool. For RAR files, and is utilized. I mean, I can think of pretty much everywhere that I've ever had to touch a computer. UnRAR has been present at some point. But the flaw itself is actually really interesting and pretty dangerous in that typically when you unarchive a file, it just uses the current working directory, and it takes everything that's in that file and it puts it into a new folder that's right there in that current working directory, and so you can just access those things. But this particular bug was a path traversal bug, and it allowed someone to craft files that would pull themselves, or as that was being unarchived, they would place themselves in other directories. So if there was a known directory on a machine that you knew you were sending this file, this compressed file to, you could have pieces of that compressed folder unarchive themselves to that separate directory and execute themselves immediately, which is a pretty big problem, I would say. But particularly, you and I were talking a little bit about the story right before the stream started, Jonathan, and you were pointing out the dangers that this poses to certain pieces of software and certain platforms that automatically unarchive files that come across. So why don't you take that conversation away?
Absolutely. So if everybody remembers the classic like 42.zip, right? It was a recursively zip archived file that when started 42 kilobytes, when it ended, it was something around 4 point something petabytes, right? And so its intention was just like fill the drive. And so zip bombs or archival malicious attacks are definitely not something new, especially considered the number of tools that automatically unarchive non-password protected things. So like, you send somebody, for instance, an email and it has a zip archive. Gmail's gonna, unarchive that and look at the contents of it, right? And put together a list and understand what's in there. And so that's an example of a system automatically unarchiving the contents of something. And so we see this with zips, we see this with cabs, we see this with a number of different compression algorithms, and RAR is one of them being very popular. And so there was also a story not too long ago where an individual was able to compromise VirusTotal simply because they were uploading files that were essentially pre-processed as part of the testing, and that pre-processing allowed the takeover of the box. And so this is a good example of that. In fact, there's a call out to a particular email server that when given a RAR file, it archives it, and therefore the path traversal allows it to dump the file wherever on the system it wants. And so, this is a classic technique. It definitely goes to show, what are your tools, like your antivirus, for instance, what are they doing when handed a file that requires pre-processing steps, and are those pre-processing steps in themselves, the libraries, the applications used, potentially vulnerable? We see this in video compression, like applications like VLC, when somebody makes a malicious movie file because they're targeting FFmpeg or one of the other number of libraries that are used as to process the encoded data. So more on this, right? I'm excited to kind of follow how these kind of challenges are going to be addressed, because I don't think there really is a solution around it. We're going to continue to pop up and see more and more of this. And I do want to call out, right? It is specific to the UnRAR utility. Right? We were talking about this, to Linux and Unix systems. So all the Windows players out there, you're good so far. But also most enterprise systems are going to be Linux in some form.
Yep. And also it's important to call out that the official security patch from RAR Lab was in the source code of version 6.1.7 and is fully baked into the binaries for 6.12. Anything before that could be vulnerable. So if you are running versions of UnRAR before 6.12, you may want to go take care of that, particularly if it's on a Unix system.
Absolutely. All right. Give me an awkward segue. Let's see what you got.
An awkward segue. speaking of unpacking things into systems where they weren't originally intended to be, a quick aside story that we have that Jonathan dug up that was just really more of an amusing thing, but it does speak to some of the conversations that we've had in the past about air gapped systems and impacting them. An old story about a Janet Jackson music video that was actually a cybersecurity exploit that took advantage of a hardware flaw um, in systems. So, Jonathan, you picked this one out. This is your baby. So why don't you?
I was so excited about this. It made a lot of mainstream news. And so specifically the register.com has an interesting article regarding Janet Jackson's 1989 pop hit Rhythm Nation. Something about the song, right? It turns out that the song contained this natural resonant frequency that directly affected a very specific model of hard drive,
Yeah.
particularly a 5400 RPM laptop hard drive that many OEM manufacturers used. And so if you had one of these laptops that had this very specific laptop hard drive in it, when you played the song ambiently, like, in your office,
Yeah.
because that's what you're jamming in the good old days is Janet Jackson, um, completely crashed the system. Like the hard drive's resonant frequency matched that of the song that was being played aloud, and boom, the laptop was dead.
Yeah.
And this happened to a lot of systems, and so Microsoft got involved, and did a big blog post on this, and a number of different other organizations. In fact, it's so prevalent that a CVE was issued to the Janet Jackson song and anyone actively using this particular hardware, and the dangers of this out of band kind of air gapped or side channel attack. So
Yeah.
just something fun. I thought it was just very interesting. We talked about the SATA cables, right? We've talked about the CPU issues, and now we're talking about playing the wrong music in the office.
Yeah. Playing the wrong song at the wrong time. It is interesting though that these are problems that like you could never account for. There's no amount really of like testing beforehand
Yeah.
or anything that would necessarily catch this, because it is entirely a fluke. I think it was originally, the problem was noted when someone was playing it out of their own laptop and it crashed the laptop. And that makes a lot of sense because you have a speaker in the laptop itself that is going to be operating at that particular resonant frequency in close proximity to the hard drive. And you're like, wow, this is a problem. And then it's not until you plug in some external speakers that it's like loud enough and hitting the right frequency particularly. And even that, it presents its own interesting set of challenges in that, do you have a set of speakers that is capable of recreating that particular tone accurately enough that it does mess with the hard drive at that resonant frequency? There are so many things that had to come together in order for this to be noticed and like caught. It's really it's really kind of impressive that anyone picked up on it at all and figured out what it was. But yeah, that is a fun little side story, but it does kind of speak to the idea that we've brought up multiple times, which is like, no matter how secure you think your system is, even if it's fully air gapped, there are always things that you're not going to account for and that you need to be you need to just be ready at all times.
This is right up
Live in
there
a
on the
horrifying
level
world.
of definitely some shenanigans.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, I definitely wanted to include that one.
So
let's
why don't
let's do you want to should I segue? Awkward segue?
I was gonna say, why don't you give us a segue? I want to see your segue between these two.
All right. Well, I'll do a normal segue. So talking about crazy exploits happening right now in the wild, it just so happens that everybody who has your favorite Chrome and Apple devices, please be sure to update. Now, by no means am I an expert when it comes to some of these really complex browser and iOS O-days, but the most important measure here is that update your Chrome browser and update all of your Apple devices, iOS, tablet, and Mac OS included. They are exploited in the wild, right?
Yep.
And so bad guys are out there, and bad gals are doing nasty things with these. So if you're if you're one of those people that gets a little notification on your iPhone and says, I'll do it later. No, no.
Yep.
Same for your browser.
Yeah, I stay on top of that stuff religiously. In fact, the most recent version of Android was just kind of like Android 13 was just like came out. No one actually it was in beta for a while. Usually I'm part of the beta programs for them because I enjoy testing it, but this time I decided not to. And then the August security patch was like super late for Android, and Google was not releasing any statements about it. Usually after a week or so, they would be like, yeah, we had an issue with XYZ. We're going to get it out next week. And they were just completely silent. And then one day it was just like, hey, by the way, new operating system version of Android. It is here. Just download it. That's the security patch for the month. Which was pretty crazy. But the moment that I saw that news story, every couple hours, I was opening up the settings on my phone and tapping check for update to see if my phone had rolled into that patch level yet. Because to me, it's extremely important to stay on top of that. So like the Apple bugs that were the 0 days that were patched in this one, both were actually pretty scary looking. So there was an issue in WebKit that led to the execution of arbitrary code. If you had some specially crafted web content, so that would just be visiting the right website, right? You are suddenly vulnerable. And the other one was an issue in the system's kernel. So malicious code could execute and have just the highest privileges on the machine, which is insane. Coming from the security background I have in whitelisting and locking down systems, that was always kind of one of the things. Like, there's always been Macs didn't get viruses for the longest time, and then they became popular and they started getting viruses. But there was just this kind of in that whitelisting community, in that space in security, it was kind of understood that Macs were just difficult to work with on whitelisting a little bit because of the way that their kernel architecture operated and everything, and they were just inherently a little bit harder to deal with, and it was a little bit harder to get those kinds of privileges. And here it is in the wild, oh yeah, we can exploit some bug in the kernel and just get the highest privileges on the machine.
Yeah, it's something about that Mako, language. One thing I do want to also note as regarding the Chrome ODAs that are being patched here is it focuses actually more specifically on the Chromium-based browsers also. And this is just one of those, kind of components where if your application is made from other parts of other, tools and libraries and applications, it kind of rolls down to you. And so for instance, Microsoft's Edge, right, is based on Chromium and is likely affected by this. Brave browser, Opera browser, and I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say Vivaldi. If you are a user of the Vivaldi browser, we want to hear from you. Please comment below and let us know your thoughts.
I'm still using
but the idea is, oh yes, there you go, Netscape. But yeah, no, this is a underlying component for Chromium-based browsers also, and therefore kind of trickles down and affects all the other tools out there that use the same stuff. So kind of does affect everything.
That has been something that's been in the back of my mind for a long time. Is kind of the dominant edge that Alphabet now, formerly Google, has managed to kind of take in this space, in that pretty much every major browser is now based on Chromium
in some way.
In some way, they're using parts of that kit, which is why I find it incredibly funny when I bought my new PC and Microsoft was like, we really want you to use Edge. Can you please just use Edge? Over and over. And I was like, it's essentially the same thing. These are all built on the same carcass here. But it's interesting to see that kind of consolidation in the way that it rears its ugly head when something like this happens, because it means that if everything is based on that common set of flaws and vulnerabilities, everything's going to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And speaking of everything being vulnerable,
go for it. Do it.
Everything from the lowest levels up to the highest levels being vulnerable, cybersecurity has now made its way to the agenda of the entire C-suite. According to a PwC survey of not just cybersecurity professionals, but just business in general.
Yeah.
Everyone cares about cybersecurity now. So there were a couple highlights specifically from this that you wanted to bring up, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. And so PwC, as mentioned, put out this survey to business executives, and it just so happens that the number one top pinnacle facing thing in the Everest Hill of issues that you got to deal with is cyber attacks.
Really torturing that
It
metaphor.
I know I'm pushing it so hard. So now that we're done with the survey, cyber attacks top the list of business risks, with 40% of all of the parties that were responding listing it as a serious risk. All right, and so this is higher than any other aspect, right? And we're having all kinds of issues across, right, stuff like talent and retention, and supply chain, right, all kinds of different things. But right now, cyber attacks are number one, and so beyond that, we're hearing that from CFOs, CMOs, and even bigger concern, right? One of the other big call outs during the survey was that the growing concern around cyber is that 51% of board members cited it as a serious risk. Also, right, this is big. This is kind of a big deal because I can hear the echoes of the office of the CISO screaming, "I told you so! I told you so!" And it's finally starting to get in there, right? And so, what are things included in this? We're talking about the realms of privacy. Data protection is also part of this bigger concern when it comes to business leaders. And the fact that everybody's a digital company now, right? We have this heavy reliance on data and analytics and mobile and cloud. And so a match with the fact that cyber threats are just growing and growing, not going anywhere, that we're getting some recognition on it. Do we have any C-level executives listening in online? Please drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you.
Please let us know what your thoughts are. If you're watching this already, I'm pretty sure I understand your perspective on cybersecurity. If you're a C-level and you're watching this, I mean, yeah, you're already taking the right steps, I guess. But yeah, like you mentioned, like 51% of board members, but as a high risk, but an additional 35% said it was at least a moderate risk. So that is a extremely large majority of now the board level members that are being surveyed here saying, I mean, I think I guess what's the way I'm trying to say this here, at least demonstrating knowledge of the fact that like, this is a risk, and this is something that we need to be paying attention to. And I think you could probably attribute some of that to the recent shifts that we've seen. Obviously like the high level attacks that have made the news and things like that, but we've talked a lot about the recent shifts from like the federal government level, and all these agencies that are pushing new directives around cybersecurity and pushing out these new guidelines to follow, putting out all these bounties on different cyber criminal gangs, and starting from the federal government down, kind of starting to view cybersecurity as a critical infrastructure problem as opposed to just a thing. And I think that starts to take that conversation out of just like an IT office and out of the the CISO and the CIO and all these people who are related to cybersecurity directly. It starts to take it into like conversations that you would have, as you're playing a round of golf, right, with other board members. Like, they're going to talk about, did you see the new, this new thing that just got signed into law that's going to impact our business? They're going to start looking at cybersecurity that way. And I think there's been a cultural shift almost around the ways that we're viewing this, which is long overdue, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? The business effect, the operational effect that it has, right? Ransomware doesn't just become a threat of give me money and we'll leak your documents and intellectual property. It is now also, think Colonial Pipeline, where we have shutdown and operational loss and downtime and additional effects that affect downstream and upstream when it comes to supply chain, right? And if you need the paint for your widget and the paint company gets hit, right, it's this whole catastrophe that affects bottom lines and wallets and money and boards everywhere. So glad to see it. And I want to see more. I want to see more seriousness around cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Bring it on.
Absolutely. And we are just a minute over here. So I think we did it. Like, that's, I think, the most we've ever packed into a single stream.
I think that's the first time we've ever packed Janet Jackson into a stream.
Yeah. Yeah, we packed a lot of stuff in here, like a RAR archive has nope, tortured metaphor again.
It's okay. Well, the Rubber Ducky story came to us from The Verge. A Bleeping Computer brought us the UnRAR, and the Register was helpful enough to share with regards to the laptop crashes. And the Hacker News had some nice highlights of the Chrome and Apple bugs. So thank you to the variety of news sources.
And cybersecurity, obviously being on the agenda, was directly from the PwC study. So thank you so much for joining us. will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we hope to see you again next week. Thanks so much, folks.
See you.